What's up everybody, it is Scapegoat here, and in this series I'm very excited to go over this awesome synth. It's called Zebralette 3, and at the time of making this video it's actually in the beta version right now. It's very new and it's completely free. So in this series we're going to be going over the beta version. If requested, I am definitely open to making a full version like when the official release comes out, because we are going to use the official user guide that UHI has uploaded, and so I highly suggest following along with that. So all the links for everything that you're going to need to get started are going to be in the description box below, and I'm also going to link a free preset pack that I made, and so hopefully that can give you some little templates and things to start creating some sounds of your own. And so without further ado, let's get started. So we are going to start with the control bar at the top over here. So when we look at the control bar, you're going to notice the Zebralette logo and also the revision number as well, and it's a label that you can always check to see what version number you have, and it also gives you an overview of the plugin format that's being loaded and the architecture as well. Next you have the transpose, which the transpose is going to give you a pitch up of plus or minus 24 semitones. So I have it at 0 here. Yours might load at a different number, but if you wanted to change it, all you'd have to do is click over here. So this is what 0 sounds like. And then here is negative 24. Here's something like plus 12. Next to that, you're going to have your fine tune. And if you want to reset it back to default, you can just double click on the knob. You also have your MIDI indicator over here, which will indicate that the synth has received MIDI data. Then you have your preset selector here, where you can select the different preset libraries that you have or patches that you've created on your own. And if you click more to the right over here, you can actually access a quick drop down menu that'll show you some presets, and then you can also cycle through the presets using these little arrow buttons here. And then if you want to access your full preset bank, you can click on the preset button, and then you could see all the different presets that you have. This layout is very similar to other UHI synths if you've ever used them in the past. And then if you want to close that, there's a little X, you just click it again. And then you also have the option to save your preset, and so you could just click save, you can give it a name, you could author it, and then even add some descriptives as well. You have an undo and redo button, which if, say, I don't know, you turn up the spectral distortion right here, we can undo that by clicking the button and it goes back to default. We can also redo it if we click it again and it goes back there to where we had it. Then you have your output volume, which is going to be like your overall output volume for the entire synth, and you can adjust that up or down or reset it just by double clicking. You also have your, if you click on this little UHI button right here, it's logo. This will give you some information about the company, the docs folder, the support forum, and even how you can further connect with UHI on social media. It also allows you to install a sound set as well. Then you have a configuration button here, which looks like a little cogwheel. When you click on that, that's going to let you set up various global preferences as well as remote control via the MIDI CC, which we can get more into that in the configuration part as well. And that's going to cover the basics of the control bar. Okay, so moving over to the oscillator panel. It is the upper panel over here, and this panel is going to be your main oscillator panel. This synth is essentially a single oscillator that allows you to draw in waveforms using splines, and we're going to get into all of that stuff. Some of it in this video and some of it in the next as well in more detail. But to understand the oscillator section, we can actually break this down into a couple of parts. So on the left, you have your main oscillator options and parameters. You have your oscillator editor in the middle here. So this is going to be like your basic oscillator editor. You also have the editor button right here on the left. If you click on this little drawing button, it's going to open up the full oscillator menu, which we are going to cover in the next video. But if we exit it out, we actually also have a basic oscillator editor in the middle right here, which is going to give you access quickly to some functions and things like that if you're just kind of going quickly. And if you want to go more in depth, you can use the full oscillator editor as well. And then your effects, which you're given a good amount of effects we're going to be getting into as well. So let's start by, like, say if you had a preset and you wanted to initialize that, you can actually just right click up here on the control bar and initialize the preset. And then you have a default patch you can work with, a blank canvas, so to speak. And so like I was saying before, we're going to start from the left and move to the right. So we have the full editor button right here, which will reveal the editor menu, which gives you so many different options on drawing the waveform. Next to that, you have this source, and you're given two different types of curve interpretations. So they can be interpreted in two different ways. You have the curve geometry, which is going to represent the waveform as is, which that's very similar to Geomorph and Zebra 2 if you are a previous user of Zebra. If you click on it, it'll change to curve spectrum. This curve represents the harmonic spectrum at 1024 harmonics, which are scaled logarithmically for a range of about 10 octaves. I highly suggest, especially as we get more technical, to really mess around with this on your own so that you can make a connection to how it changes the sound. So you kind of need both perspectives. So next to that, we have the renderer. And so the renderer is going to generate your final waveform. You have different options. So you have like classic wavetable, and you also have the additive as well. And if you notice, when you switch between wavetable and additive, you get some different parameter options. We're going to go over those. Those will only be enabled, and it's pretty like obvious, but those are only available per that renderer. So say like the wavetable renderer, it's going to render the waveform like a classic wavetable synth. It will update it dynamically at the rate set by the resolution parameter over here. If you want to set higher resolution, you have that option. You just have to note that it is going to be at cost to a CPU. Next to that, you have a unison. Unison sets the number of stacked oscillators, and you have an option. I mean, really, you can go between like 2 and up to 16. This is one of those options that's only available if you have the wavetable renderer selected. Now, if I switch over to additive, you'll notice that it changes over to harmonics, and that's going to be the number of sine oscillators used for the additive rendering. So you do have an option, a range of 16, as low as 16 and all the way to 1024. If you were going to choose, say, like a lower value, that would be good for making like glassy material type of sounds. But if you were, say, going for a higher harmonic value, that's going to sound better for things like virtual analog. Now, do keep in mind that these values are going to affect your CPU. So the higher the value, the more CPU usage, but it's going to sound more like analog-y, so to speak. But if you wanted the, if you were doing more, materials type of sounds, you can just click a lower resolution, and that's actually going to save you CPU power. And like I was saying before, you do have that resolution over here. It refers to the density of waveform calculations. So you have different hertz to choose from, and that's essentially how often they're updated per second. Like I was saying before, those higher resolutions are going to come at a cost to the CPU, and lower is going to be easier on the computer. Then you have the drift option. So if you turn this on, you can enable it by clicking. If that's active, it's going to basically make the notes slightly detuned. So it's going to emulate something like, if you're really going for that analog sound, you might want this drift selected. Depending on the results you get, it's a good option to have. You have your standard sort of tuning, which if the fine tune at the top control bar isn't enough, you can actually go up to like 48 semitones here actually. So you can pitch all the way up to 48 and down 48 semitones. Now say if we're back at wavetable, you're going to notice there's a detune knob, and that's going to give you a plus or minus 2 semitone range. You got your standard panning left and right. And then you have an oscillator gain, where the difference between this and the other output is that this oscillator gain is going to be affected before the delay and reverb effect, where the output on the control bar is going to affect the whole synth output. Then you have a width knob, which is essentially like stereo separation, and it only works if you have 2 or more voices. And also, the renderer has to be set to wavetable. Now say if we switch over to additive, you'll notice that it changes to noise, and noise is a spectral chaos effect. Then you have a phase, which is on the bottom left over here, and you can have the phase set to random. So say if you had the renderer set to wavetable, this option would reset the oscillator to a random phase each time you play a new note. Now if it's an additive, the phase of each individual harmonic is randomized. You can also set it to reset. That's going to ensure that the notes always start at the same place, and if the renderer is additive, the phases of the individual harmonics are unaltered. So next, when we set the renderer to additive, you're going to notice this little modifier box pop up, which when you click on it, it's going to reveal some more options. So let's go over those real quick. Expansion is the first option, and that's going to stretch harmonics up 1 octave. At maximum spectral distortion, the result is going to be odd numbered harmonics only. Under that, you have compression, so it's going to compress all the harmonics down to the fundamental. This happens when reached at maximum spectral distortion. Under that, you have a curve, and that curve gives you some other types of options. This allows you to bend harmonics, sort of like oscillator effects. The curve is going to tap into the guides or curve set, determining the expansion or compression for each harmonic, and it's based on its level along the spectral curve source. And so with the spectral curve source, you have guides or curve set to choose from, and then you have the spectral morph parameter right here. That parameter is going to either adjust the position along the curve's timeline, which we're going to be talking about, or it can crossfade between 3 guides depending on how you have it set up. So when you're editing source curves for this type of modifier, the harmonic grid view is probably going to be your best option. It's basically because each vertical line corresponds to a certain harmonic. So you can zoom in to view all the grid lines and harmonics, and negative values on each curve compresses the corresponding harmonics towards the fundamental, which positive parts retune harmonics up to an octave above the original frequencies. The next modifier you have is harmonic clusters, and harmonic clusters is essentially, it's going to be enabled at maximum spectral distortion, and this mode is going to organize the resulting spectrum into equally spaced clusters. And so I have a list here of the different harmonics and things when at cluster select, which you can choose with this knob over here. Then you have the log clusters option, which is similar to harmonic clusters, but instead of clusters being spaced evenly across the spectrum, they are distributed to ensure equal energy across the spectrum. So you could start with something like 3 and have a maximum level of 10 clusters, which are spaced precisely octaves apart. So this is like going to be good for like bells and organ type of sounds. Then you have your chaos patterns, which is going to reorganize harmonics into random parts. So you have the random seed knob here, which is going to select one of 100 preset patterns. By just kind of scrolling up, you can mess around with that. And then you have your distortion range, which the distortion range, you have some different options. You have your 1 octave, which is going to shift each harmonic randomly. Then you have 4, which is going to randomly shift them up to 4 octaves above or below the original frequency. You have your ordered option as well, and that frequency, that's going to refer to the frequency of each harmonic in which they're juggled up and down, but they cannot cross paths with neighboring harmonics, so the order is essentially preserved on this option. Then you have 1 harmonic, which each harmonic is going to be randomly shifted towards neighboring harmonics only. This option lets you sequence or otherwise modulate randomness during playback. So this is something that's going to be good for like percussion sounds and cymbals and stuff like that. And next, following that, in the center here, you have your basic oscillator editor, which is really cool. It's a lot of fun to mess with this. And so this is a slimmed down, simpler version of the full oscillator editor, which we're also going to go over. But for the basic oscillator editor, you have essentially access to quick editing. So if you're pretty familiar with like graphic vector applications like Illustrator, or there's free ones like Inkscape and stuff like that, this kind of stuff might actually hit close to home, especially conceptually. If you can think of it sort of kind of like drawing drawing with the pen tool. It's sort of like that. So you can actually add points by just double clicking on the background. It's going to add new points. Then if you want to move a selection, you can click and drag any of these points to adjust your selection. If you wanted to say move multiple points at once, you can actually click and hold and you could select them and it's going to adjust them all together. You can also extend or reduce the selection by shift clicking the different points. Now say if you want to get rid of a selection, all you have to do is just click on the background. Now if you wanted to curve, say some of the line in between some of these points, you can click and drag on the line segments themselves. So you can see it'll start to curve the lines in between the points. And then say if you wanted to remove a point, you could select it and then hit backspace. If you click on the segment here, it'll straighten it out. And if you want to zoom into a certain point of the waveform, you could just use your scroll wheel on your mouse, whatever you have your trackpad set to, and you can zoom in and out. And all of these functions that I just showed you right here are also going to apply to the full oscillator editor as well when you have the arrow tool selected. And this is also going to apply for the MSEG editor as well. Above this graph over here, you're going to see this line, and it's going to essentially connect to different waveforms. What that is essentially the timeline, and you can actually put up to 16 curves up here and morph between them. You have a pre-listen option over here, so you can click to select a curve for editing and then activate the pre-listen to audition only that curve. You can double click on a curve, as you can see here. I'm double clicking, and it's going to set the curve morph value to that position. And say if you wanted to move a curve along the timeline, you can click on the yellow dot here and then just drag across. Now, say if you want to delete a curve, you have to have at least two. So say if we had a third one right here, we can add an empty curve. And say you wanted to get rid of it, you could just right click on it and delete the curve. So we have these context menus, which are basically the right click menus. So if you right click on the timeline, you're going to notice some options here. You have your add empty curve. It's going to insert a falling sawtooth at the clicked position. You can add a morphed curve, which is going to insert an interpolated curve, essentially what the curve morph would deliver. Then you can duplicate your selected curve as well. You can also copy and paste as well. So if you have a curve, you can just Command C or Control C, Control V, or Command C, Command V, and that can allow you to copy and paste curves. You could also distribute evenly, which is going to reposition all curves so that they are evenly spread from 0 to 100. And then you have your reverse order, which if you have a certain order on the timeline here, you could literally flip it around, and that's really cool as well. Now in the graph that we were going over, if you right click inside of the graph, you're going to see another context menu, and that's just for the oscillators. So you have some different options here. You have your copy SGV, and then your paste. Then you have your flip X and flip Y. You can flip them horizontally. You can flip your waveform vertically. You have the beautify, which is going to smooth the curve or selection, but it doesn't apply to steps. You have your simplify, which is going to remove points that have little impact on the shape of the curve or selection. So adding curvature wherever necessary. This can also be applied in multiple passes. Then you have the Sinomatic, which is essentially similar to Beautify, but attempts to create sine arcs, perfect sine arcs, as the guide puts it. It actually looks really nice, especially when you just want to get like a quick sine wave type of sound. You don't have to like draw it in, and it takes a while. You also have Line Up, which is going to adjust the curve or selection to form a straight line. And then you have your Distribute X, is going to spread all the points in the curve or in the selection evenly across the X-axis. You can also Clean Up, which is going to remove points. It removes points that have zero impact on the shape of the curve or selection. And then you have your Select All, which is going to just select all the points or segments within the entire curve. You could also select Similar, which selects all points or segments with a similar function to that current selection. And then you have the invert selection, which is going to select all the unselected points instead of the current selection. So you can do a lot of different stuff here. It's insane. And then you have the export wave, which saves the curve set, including all morphed intermediates, but not the oscillator effects. So it'll basically save it as a .wave based wavetable file. So again, you have that pre-listen, which is going to temporarily set the position of the highlighted curve while disabling curve morph. And then you have the curve morph, which is going to refer to the nominal position within the oscillator's timeline. It's practically a smooth curve selector. You can kind of think of it like that. Then you have your plot domain, which is essentially like a real-time oscilloscope to trace in the editor window. And you have some different ways you could set that oscilloscope. So you have the pre-effects, which is going to show you the waveform before oscillator effects. Then you have the post effects, which is going to show you after the effects are applied. Then you have the FX1 guide curve, which is the source used in oscillator FX1, and then you have your FX2 guide curve, which is the source used for oscillator FX2. So something to note is that the plot is a pre-renderer and is independent of the editor window zoom factor. So when you roll your mouse wheel, you could check that. Now next to that, you have oscillator effects. And oscillator effects, you got a ton of different effects. And so we are actually going to cover all of this in another video. In the next video, we are going to go over the full oscillator. So hopefully that gives you a vibe, and hopefully that helps you kind of start getting started. Stay posted for the next videos that are going to be coming out on this synth. I hope you found this one helpful. And as always, until next time.